Welcome to a conversation with Jennie and Laurie about Taurus season. We are just moving into Taurus season 2022, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to do it in a very different way. We're going to kind of give a little bit of an overview of this period ahead, and then we're going to look at how it impacts each of you determined by your rising sign. So Taurus, you want to talk about Taurus? Oh, actually, before we go into that, let me say that if you want to find Jennie, you want to go to hiddenpathastrology.com. And if you want to find me, go to astrolore.org. You can find us, follow us, have us do readings for you, teaching, whatever. Also, please like, share, and comment on this video. There.
Yes, please.
Now we're ready to talk about Taurus.
That's right.
And Taurus is, first of all, just to be clear here, Taurus is the fixed earth sign. And it's ruled by Venus.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do we know about Taurus?
Well, let's start with the idea that we're just coming out of Aries season, and Aries is a cardinal fire sign. And so in a lot of ways, Taurus is a response to that very hot, kind of fast and furious energy of Aries, where Taurus is a yin sign. It's earth. It's about slowing down, calming down, getting grounded, getting stable, and just calming down after all of that real strong, fierce heat of Aries. So every sign is a response to the sign before it. So that's what we see with Taurus. We're all ready for a little bit of calming and cooling down. So we think
a little bit of sunshine, some new flowers growing. I always think of that, with Taurus being ruled by Venus, that in where we live, in the Northern Hemisphere here, this is the time when all the flowers are beginning to bloom and everything is beautiful. So I think of that with Taurus.
Yeah.
It's a little different this year than what we might generally anticipate.
Yeah, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Taurus in terms of, you said the Northern Hemisphere, so that's signifying spring up here in the north, and it's also signifying the middle of spring. It's a fixed sign, and all of the 4 fixed signs you're going to find them in the middle of seasons, so it's really the kind of true essence of spring at this point. A really good symbol for Taurus is this idea of a plowed field, where the field's all being turned and plowed so that you can plant those seeds in the nourishing earth. So that's kind of a good thing to hold in your mind to understand it. And Taurus is very much the sign of Mother Nature, of these little green sprouts like bursting forwards, and the flowers that you talked about. That's a good way of thinking about how Taurus connects to Venus, that physical beauty. So
and it really does. It shows how Western astrology is built on the seasons, not on the constellations, and I feel like that has to be continually repeated so people understand that this is based on seasons.
Yeah. And Laurie, what are some character traits of people who have Taurus in your life?
Well, the more negative side of it that you always hear about is the stubbornness. But yeah, Taurus is very stable, very very connected to the earth. I love the word reverence with Taurus. There's a real reverence for nature, for stability. Taurus is always trying to get things the way it should be and hold it steady there. They don't, Taurus, the energy of Taurus does not want a lot of upheaval or drama. Yeah, like you said, it's coming after Aries, all that heat and hot activity. It's like, calm it down, cool it down, plow the fields, plant the seeds, and have some reverence while you watch those plants grow.
Yeah. And also, like, you probably have heard, it's Taurus the bull, right? So the bull is a very strong, sturdy, reliable animal that's all about drawing a yield from the earth. So that's how you can think of it. And you can think of the bull with those big, strong shoulders. And Taurus does rule the shoulders. and the neck. So you really can think about those aspects of the bull. And I like to think about that in nature, when things are in balance, we have equilibrium and things naturally move into equilibrium. So Taurus is very much about let's find equilibrium and let's stay there and
Yeah,
be
let's stay
stable
there.
and grounded. So we'll talk more about where that Taurus energy falls in your chart, and get a little bit more into that idea of groundedness and
And
some other topics.
I
So,
want to say one other thing about the bull,
mhm.
because Taurus, yes, it's the bull, but it's not the raging angry bull. It's
Mhm.
the Ferdinand sitting underneath the tree. Remember the Ferdinand the bull story?
Oh yeah, I love that story.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bull of Taurus. That's the,
Mhm.
you know, the bull that knows its strength enough that it can sit under the tree and smell the flower. It doesn't have to show up like an angry bull because it has that trust in its own strength. I remember also, I just have to say this, you know, all the signs have a more positive and a more challenging side to them. And I remember many, many years ago reading that Taurus is the only sign that has the ability to bore itself to death.
Oh,
And you
that's
know,
hilarious.
that's the real negative side
Mhm.
of stability, you know, trying to get things so stable that, you know, putting safety above all else,
Mhm,
can
mhm.
put a person in a position of boredom, because
Yeah.
you know there has to be a little risk for excitement. And yeah,
Mhm.
so
And if
that's an interesting part of Taurus.
I think, yeah, and I think if you have people in your life that have that Taurus energy, sometimes it takes a little bit of patience to get to know them properly. But if
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
so they kind of demand that you cultivate that patience, which is a good thing. But they are very reliable, and they also sometimes I've noticed they can tend towards silence when you want more conversation. And my tip is just take a step back and allow that silence because it's worth it, the wait, because they really can be the people that give you so much support and stability in your life. So just think about that.
yeah, that's
um,
very, very important.
yeah. Have we exhausted all the Taurus significations for the moment, or there'll be more as we talk about the
Yeah,
individual charts?
yeah,
But
I think
yeah.
that's good for now. So now let's think about what it is we're going to be looking at through the course of the whole month.
Hmm.
We're going
Sounds
to
good.
basically be looking at the two lunations
Hmm.
and the planets that change signs
Hmm.
and the retrogrades. What else?
Hmm. And the fact that both lunations are eclipses.
Yes.
And we're also going to talk about a couple different conjunctions
Yeah.
that happen. So that's the short list.
Right.
um, do you want me to talk a little bit about the month as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What does this month feel like? Because it's not going to be like Taurus all season. We're
Yeah.
not going to sit
Hmm.
around and rest and sniff the flowers under the tree. That's not going to be the
Yeah.
month.
Unfortunately.
Right. Unfortunately.
Well, the sun goes into Taurus on April 19th, and then, at a certain point, it is going to encounter the planet Uranus. So right away, we know Uranus is the great disruptor. It's also the awakener. So we already know that Taurus has this very disruptive planet in it. That's what's happening with it. And so we already that's one of the big things that we've been dealing with in the last couple of years. So the sun, when it conjuncts that, it's not going to be its normal, tranquil, quiet Taurus. It's also going to square Saturn at some point during its journey. Um, so do you want to talk a little bit about the Saturn Uranus square briefly, Laurie? Or
Well,
oh.
you know, the Saturn Uranus square has been really active for going on 2 years now.
Mhm.
And it really, if you just think about those two planets, Uranus is all about disruption and awakening, and Saturn is all about stabilizing and structuring things. So those two have been in a square aspect for the past couple of years. Really, you know, you can see it in the culture, just how much anxiety there is between those two ideas of wake up, move forward, and oh no, we got to stop and stay and keep things the way we want them to be. There's so much disruption. So that disruption that the whole culture has been in for a few years now is really, the light is shining on it through the course of this Taurus season.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The light shining out with the sun, light of the sun. Yeah, I mean, it really is a clash of certain parts of the culture. So with that square aspect, so that they're definitely seeing and feeling that. So that's kind of, I think in a general, this Taurus season, that kind of kicks off the idea of there's some unrest and there's a lack of stability that normally we might hope for in Taurus. But we also have a couple planets that are changing from dreamy, imaginative, ethereal Pisces and going into Aries. So we still have that Aries heat coming into the picture very much.
Right. We thought we were leaving Aries behind, but we're not.
No, we're not.
Right.
And we're also, and then, so, hey, here's all this Aries kind of coming in to heat things back up. But then again, we have Mercury going into retrograde. So we have another kind of way in which, and the energy is going to backtrack. So there's a little bit of some pendulum swinging here where there's some tension, there's some disruption to the normal stability. And then we have these eclipses, which are, eclipses symbolize sort of like endings and closings during those lunation periods, among other things. And it's really, really, really important that we pay really close attention and work with our conscious awareness during these times and tune into what is happening, because there's some things that are kind of tucked away in the shadows in those eclipses. And so it takes extra effort to be able to see what those are and be honest with yourself and kind of dig in and look and see what's happening that's tucked away just a little bit. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
We will, I just want to state this, that we will be doing videos about the eclipses as well. So we're not going to talk about that a whole lot here today. We'll be dealing with that later.
That's right. The only other thing I want to throw in is we do have one of the cross quarter days. The Beltane is on May 1st. So that's just the bang in the middle of spring and a time for celebration. I think that's kind of like the real quick summary of what we're looking at for the month. And then I think, Laurie, we're just going to get right into our charts.
Yeah, let's just take a look at where this is falling in your individual chart. So here we're going to start right off with those of you who have Aries rising. The Taurus statement is bringing the sun, the light and the warmth of the sun is coming right into the second house of your own self-worth, money, resources, those types of issues. So there's a lot of attention in that area. And what we want to look at next is where those eclipses are happening. Is that what we want to look at also? Those will be between the Taurus and the Scorpio houses.
That's right.
So that will be between that second house of your own personal values and resources and other people's values and resources. So that's going to be an area to pay attention to for those eclipses.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit more about I guess we just talk about more about where this falls in this chart.
Yeah.
I mean, I always like to think about, so Taurus is going to be a place, I mean, given the fact that there's going to be some tumult in this area of everyone's life to some degree. I think about Taurus as a place where it might be a place in your life that serves as a great source of groundedness that you really feel stable in. But it might also represent the place in your life where you need to move towards that and you need to actively seek out a source of grounding. So I think that that's something to think about as we go through these different houses.
Right.
So in the second house, you really are going to want to be grounded in your self-worth. You're going to want to have a really strong connection with how you value yourself. It's going to be really important. And some of that might bubble up some information about money and your relationship to money.
Yeah, especially there on when the sun conjuncts Uranus, which is on May 5th. So look for a little bit of anxiety or some change in that area at that time. And for your own personal looking at it, what has been the stress that is being now kind of the light shining on a particular stress that's been going on for you around money, resources, self-esteem, and your community where you receive support with
Yeah. Oh,
that square.
yeah. I like how you're drawing in the. Yeah, I like that you're doing that and bringing in that because there is a
Yeah,
relationship between that second and 11th house, like where the 11th house, in a
right,
sense, is like social resources. Like, who are the
right,
people who are holding you up?
right.
Um,
And that's where there's been a stress for the past couple of years between Saturn and Uranus. And when the sun comes down and hits on this point and then squares that point, that's being activated.
mm, hmm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's let's see. So the solar eclipse is going to fall in that second house on April 30th for you, and the lunar eclipse, where it's going to be the full moon, is May 16th. So that's when you're really two crucial points during this month you want to think about with Aries rising.
Right.
Um,
And then there's two other things that, I might be missing a few, but two other really important things that I want to make sure we pay attention to is that, Mercury will move into Gemini
mhm.
on April 29th and then go retrograde in Gemini on May 10th. That will be in your third house. So this is very much around rethinking your communications,
Mm,
what you're, really being clear about your communications, your relationships with neighbors, siblings, etc.
yeah.
Hmm.
That's a good thing to think about, because the other thing that's going to be going in your chart, Aries rising, is that you're going to have both Venus and Jupiter moving into Aries. So they're
Right.
going to move out of that dream space that's
Yeah.
kind of being in
Yeah.
the back of your mind and kind of floating around, and this kind of ethereal stuff. And it's going to, once those two planets, especially Jupiter, move into Aries, it's going to be all systems go, in that area of your life, which for you, it's the first house. So this is your main impetus in life, like your way of kind of charging through life, is going to be, with those planets moving there, you're just adding more emphasis into that area.
Right. Yeah. That dreamy
Mm.
space, we've all had that dreamy space wherever Pisces is in our lives. For you, it's been, a very internal, inner workings of your mind have been sort of a sweet spot for a while. As Mars moved in there a few days beforehand or
Hmm.
a week beforehand, I don't have the exact date, but the kind of the cracks start to be seen. It's not all perfect in there. And then Jupiter bails.
Yeah.
Jupiter bails. Jupiter's like, I'm on to the next process.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and Venus said a few days before, so yeah, that's really the nice sweet spot. You had that nice dream, just like you said, Laurie. It's all kind of coming apart at the seams, and now guess what? You're going to have to take action,
Right.
on the things that you
Right. You
decided. So
can't just sit around and dream it anymore. You have to take action on it. That's a very, very good point right there.
yeah.
Okay. Um, Anything else we want to touch on, or are we heading
Um,
on to Taurus rising?
Well, just to summarize for you Aries rising folks, that main Taurus focus in the second house. So the self-worth piece, the questions about money, disruptions to your resources, things like that is going to be the bulk of your focus, right?
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, the bulk of your focus will be there. And here you're on all systems go to kind of expand your personality with that Jupiter. That's a really important one, Jupiter, because Jupiter spends approximately a year in each sign. It'll be here in Aries, I think until October. It backs into Pisces for a little bit
Mhm.
longer. But basically for the next year, it'll be in your first house, expanding
Mhm.
your awareness of self and expression of self.
Mhm.
So
All right.
next, let's go on to, let's get that out of there. Okay. Now we're looking at those of you who have Taurus rising. This brings the light and the heat of the sun into your first house. How are you showing
Mhm.
up in the world?
Yeah, this is a big month for the folks at Taurus rising. I can think of a few people with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, this is really your self-image, your appearance. Um, with Hellenistic astrology, you're really thinking about your body,
Mm.
maybe keeping your body. You're wanting some kind of stasis. There's with Uranus there, you've had some upsets in your basic
Yeah.
equilibrium in your life. And some of this could be really cool, like inventive and awakening and something new on the horizon, but some of them could also feel pretty disruptive and anxiety provoking. So there's a lot with the sun coming into this house now at this point, really shining a light on those things, self-image, self-development.
So again, like we
Yeah.
talked about it before, when the sun conjuncts Uranus, that brings in the upheaval in the personality, shining a light on this bit of a challenge you've been in for a couple of years between probably some way that you show up in the world and your personality
Mm-hmm.
itself. Because, yeah, the sun will conjunct Uranus and then square Saturn, bringing that challenge to light.
Yeah, and just bear in mind too that the first house and the 10th house, they're angular houses. So they're some of the most powerful houses. Actually, they are the two most powerful houses in your chart. So those of you with this, there's a lot going on. There's big things on the horizon with anybody with Taurus rising for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my head is going next to that the Mercury retrograde
Yeah.
piece,
Yeah.
tipping into the second house of
Mercury.
resources and values and your self-worth, before dipping back into Taurus. So what was it you said? You said something about checking in with how you think about yourself. I mean, Mercury, especially in Gemini, this is all about your mindset.
Mm.
And remember, the mind is very trainable. The mind is malleable. So this could be helpful to retrain your mind, to rethink about
Right.
how you're doing all this, rethink about your resources.
Yeah. Yeah. That as Mercury moves into Gemini and then slows way down and does its retrograde, it's a rethinking of your own self-worth and um, and how you use your resources,
Mm-hmm.
how you
Yeah.
think about how you use your resources. Okay. So there's that. Let me get that out of there. The lunations, the eclipses are going to be between yourself and your partners or, um, yeah, seventh house
Mm-hmm.
friendships, whatever seventh house. You can think of, a lot of people tend to think of the seventh house as just spousal relationships, but it's any one-on-one significant partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this might be just thinking like you're going to plant a seed with the new moon. And so that's something about yourself, something about stabilizing and grounding yourself. And then that full moon lunar eclipse is going to impact the relationship. So is it time to close the door on some aspect of your relationship that is no longer serving either of you, let alone you? Is
Right.
it time to make a little shift? So these are kind of the kinds of things you want to think about. Something that maybe has been a bit of an anchor around your neck, and time to cut it loose, let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
then
And
I,
then what's next?
I was just thinking about the ingresses. So now you've got this nice dreamy Pisces space in
Oh,
your community, and whoops, now it's getting serious and it's going behind the scenes. Yet it's Aries.
right.
Yeah.
So that's, that it is. It's like you've been in this space of this dreaminess and community. You feel supported in some way. Mars has recently moved in there, bringing up a few of the cracks in the facade there. And then Jupiter leaves that area. And it's like, it's time to take action on some internal understanding,
Mm.
opening up some portal in your mind to take
Yeah.
action. Yeah.
Where it said this is always a tricky one to think about, but it's almost like you might need to take that solo retreat and take action on the solo retreat. I mean, that's sort of the irony of Aries in the 12th house, but it's something that somehow reveres your autonomy, but in the face of the collective. I mean, that's a huge kind of
Right.
jump to make, but
Right.
it's something to do that some kind of way that you're having to wrestle with, I don't know, some kind of dissolution. So it might be that your
Mm.
community's changing, or for some reason, what came to mind too is there. This might be the loss of people. You know, there's something about grief and sadness that may pop into this too. So just
Huh.
tuning into what's going on
Interesting.
there, that you may need some time alone for some
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Huh.
yeah.
Time alone for active healing.
Yeah.
You know, because it's Aries, so it's an
Uh-huh.
active. It's not like you're going to go and sit on a meditation cushion to
Mhm.
do that work. It's like it really entails some physicality, I think, with Aries there.
Yeah, you might be buying a plane ticket and flying somewhere and renting a car and driving yourself to some remote place that you're doing this in. I mean, it could be something along those
Yeah,
lines, or,
that's
but
interesting.
anyway, yeah,
Interesting to think of that. Okay, does that cover it all?
I think so. I think we've hit the main ones here. So yeah.
So yeah, like with all of this, it really does feel like I think you said it before we started recording was it's sort of like there's a lot of potholes. Like it's time to move forward and yet there's a
Mm,
lot of potholes or
yeah.
um yeah, you're driving with both the brakes and the gas on.
Yeah.
It's like
I was, yeah.
huh,
I mean,
interesting.
you can really picture that. Or I was thinking, I mean, living up in the Northeast, we've had one heck of a mud season. So I'm thinking a little bit like it's mud season with Taurus, because it's some unpredictable holes or something that's hard to drive. It's not smooth sailing. So
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting just thinking about all that Pisces with the Taurus, you
Mm.
know, initially as the month begins, you know, you talk about mud season. It's like, okay, Taurus and Pisces, that makes mud for sure. People who
Yeah.
don't live in Vermont probably aren't going to know what we're talking about with mud season. Yeah, I think you have to live in Vermont to understand mud season. Okay, so we're going to go from Taurus. We're going to go for those of you who have um, Gemini. Why is this like, oh, I know why it's not moving. Okay, hang on. I just thought I had a glitch, but here we go.
No problem.
Gemini
Yeah.
rising. So
All
those of
right.
you who have Gemini rising, the sun is moving into your 12th house, your unconscious thinking, your, yeah, what's behind the scenes internally, a real deep inner knowing, understanding. So the light is shining on that area of
Hmm.
your life. Huh.
Yeah. And I mean, I think with Gemini rising, there's always going to be some sort of tangibility to whatever your spiritual wrestle is, I like to call it, whatever it is that you kind of
Right.
work with your spirituality. There's something tangible about it. I mean, this could be, uh, it's time to get, you may need some like body work that goes along with
Hmm.
this, that helps bring you into that relaxed
Oh,
meditative state. You know, it might be
that's
some things like that.
perfect.
Yeah, like
That's
could
perfect.
be helpful.
Really, body work with that Taurus in the 12th house, that's a really good point. And I think, you
Mm-hmm.
know, paying attention again to that Uranus Saturn square where there's been some tension inside you, you know, something that you've been grappling with for a few years around your own internal quiet understanding and your worldview. There's a
Mm-hmm.
conflict somewhere in there that the light is going to be really shining on and making you pay attention to as the month goes on and we reach that sun conjunct Uranus on May 5th and squaring Saturn on May 15th.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
I also think too, with Saturn and Aquarius in your ninth house and being Gemini rising, I mean that's a lot of sort of
Hmm.
air going on, and having that Taurus in the 12th house it's you got to bring it back down to earth. That's where, so really I almost think about, if you do have a meditation practice, this is the time to bring in that whole idea of the tree, like rooting down into the earth and really sensing yourself as connected to the tangible things, the seat that you're on as you're sitting in your meditation pose. Or if you're out in meditative walks in nature, it's feet on the ground. It's really feeling that connection each step that you take of how you're connected to the earth. Those are things that me super helpful with a Gemini rising.
Yeah, I think so. As you're saying that, I can get a real feeling for that Saturn going through Aquarius in that ninth house and just bringing up a lot of anxiety around the world view. And yeah, what you need to do is ground it into your body with the meditation or the massage.
Yeah, and having these two big planets in the cadent houses, so that's the ninth and the 12th, that sort of suggests it's very distracting. It's very hard for you to not get pulled into those struggles. So it's extra important to figure out how to ground that anxiety. So yeah.
That's important stuff,
What else?
I think.
Okay, so retrograde.
The other thing, let's think about that retrograde. The Mercury retrograde will be happening in your first house. So Mercury will enter that first house on the 29th, April 29th. Mercury will go into your first house. Your attention becomes less on what's happening in your unconscious and more just what's happening with your personality, how you're showing up in the world. And then it slows down and goes retrograde on May 10th. Really, yeah.
This is almost like you're like, oh, I'm ready, I'm good, I'm ready to emerge, like everything's cool, I've done my work, and then Mercury's like, actually, you didn't do that one piece of thing you needed to do to really get grounded. Like, you're actually not as grounded as you think. So we're going to go back and go back out into nature and find some more grounding. It's kind of something like that with a retrograde.
And then, were you going to say something else? I don't want to.
No, I'm ready to.
Okay. I think the next thing I want to think about is that Jupiter's movement, right? Jupiter getting out of Pisces. You know, you've been in that dreamy space there in the 10th house. In some manner, the outer world or your career or something you're doing out in the world has felt pretty blissful. Mars moved in there. A few little cracks start showing. And then Jupiter says, oh, I'm done here. I'm going to leave you guys alone. I'm moving into the 11th house. And Jupiter starts expanding the need to take action in the area of career. Or I'm sorry, in the area of your community.
Yeah. I was thinking with Aries there, I was like, oh, this is the time to join that pickleball team or to just do something fun, like something that burns off that fire a little bit with your community. Because there's also plenty of seriousness that is going on in that community of things around leadership and how do we need to step up, but also might be time to just figure out a way to burn off some fire in the group too. That could be very helpful to all that conversation around anxiety we were having a minute ago. The other thing you mentioned is the eclipses. This sign. So the eclipses are falling in your 6th and 12th house. This is a time of, I think, really getting square with those grounding practices, planting a seed to maybe close the door on some things that are not serving you and starting something where you're really bringing some kind of grounding practice into your day-to-day. That's sort of a general statement about those eclipses. This is in the name of supporting your health. This is in the name of really having an anchor that's going to help keep you healthy.
I think
physically and mentally.
Paying attention to your physical, mental, and emotional health during this time is really significant and important. Do what you need to do. You know, if you if there are medical appointments that you've been not paying attention to, pay attention. Take do what you need to do on that level. I think that's an important one. Okay. Anything else? Or are we ready to move on? Or any wrap up
we're
here?
Ready to. No, I think this is. I think we've covered this pretty well. Yeah.
All right. So next we're going to go to those of you with Cancer rising, And with Cancer rising, the sun has moved into your 11th house. So you're starting to really, the light is shining in that area of community, in the area of where, like-minded people are supporting you.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
really what that house is about.
I like the way you put that. But also, it comes to mind immediately is that there is going to be some disruptions in your community. You probably have also already seen some changes. Now, this might mean that your buddies down the street buy a house out in the country and are having a baby. This might mean, that's changing your community. It could mean all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But it also might mean that there's an awakening that's happening with who your community really is, so it's not all bad. It's just being aware that change is inevitable, and that's probably where a lot of change is happening for anyone with Cancer rising.
Yeah, and I think it's really great to look once again at that long-term Uranus Saturn square. There has been this tension between your community and that whole idea of other people's values. There's been a struggle there. Probably, maybe some people in your community, all of a sudden you realize that they're, at the other end of the political spectrum that you are. And all of a sudden there's this tension within the community, between your community and other people's values. And this light, when the sun conjuncts Uranus and squares Saturn, it's really shining a light on that challenge, and how that challenge will develop into a real change in your community.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to put that, Laurie. The thing about the political spectrum. Yeah, it's interesting if you think about, so here we're talking about succedent houses, the 8th and the 11th. And they're both about resources in a way. The 11th is about those social resources of the group, and then the 8th house is the shared resources that are kind of between others. So this is also a place where sometimes people get some kind of inheritance. They get money that isn't theirs through being earned. It's something they're given. Or they inherit, so there's some really interesting things to think about with these two. Somebody else's values are just different, so shifting the community, you've kind of already covered that. So yeah, cool.
Shift in the community. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is thinking about Mercury. Mercury is going to head into Gemini, so into your 12th house on April 29th. And then it's going to promptly slow down and turn retrograde on May 11th in Gemini. I believe is the entire retrograde in Gemini?
No, it's not.
It does go back. It does go back.
It retrogrades at 4 degrees of Gemini, and it goes back to 26 Taurus. Okay. So it does, for everybody, it's definitely crossing two pretty, different areas of life.
Okay. But during this Taurus season, the retrograde will remain in Gemini.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So Gemini, Mercury moves into Gemini, and, your thoughts kind of turn from the community into your own unconscious understanding, and slow right down. And you're going to be retracing those steps. You're going to be coming back to the consideration of the community with some understanding of your own judgments, maybe. That's what that makes me think of.
Yeah, this almost makes me think, for some reason pops in my head, that when it goes into Gemini, it's like that, I don't know, reading books about self-help and like working, kind of doing your thing, and then whoops, when it retrogrades and goes back into Taurus, you're actually going to have to try those things out and be like, ooh, did I do work on myself that helped me in my group situation? And you're going to get a chance to kind of see how that works. And another opportunity to have it all be grounded in the real world, get out of that headspace.
I like that. That's awesome. I like that. Okay. So next, I think the next thing we want to talk about is Jupiter moving out of Pisces. So if we just think about it, all right, if you've got Cancer rising, you've had this little sweet spot going on in the 9th house, your worldview, something you're learning maybe. that expands your understanding of the world. So it's been a sweet spot. Mars moved in there, a few cracks start appearing, and then Jupiter heads into the 10th house. So
Yeah.
that's going to bring an expansion of time to take action on your career or your outward reputation in some manner.
Yeah, and it's interesting thinking about, because both Venus and Jupiter are moving there, and it's like this is the benefics in the ancient astrology viewpoint. And so they're both these very positive planets that are both very happy in Pisces and then are going out to the, fast, furious world of Aries. So there's a couple ways you can think about it. It's definitely time to take action on whatever your thing is being that you're kind of thinking about in the background that you've been, as you said, you've been studying. But also it's a time from taking that kind of positive viewpoint of, what thing do you want to take action on? How do you want to expand, and how do you want to relate to people better through your career, through the autonomy that you have in your career?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know somebody with a Cancer rising that this is probably very relevant to, as far as, really kind of preparing. I always think of planets moving through the 9th house. It's preparing for the motion into the 10th, the cardinal house, angular house rather. So when Jupiter moves over there, you've been really preparing by expanding your understanding and knowledge. And now it's going to move in there. Okay, time to take action. You can't just sit around in the dream anymore.
Yeah.
I wonder who I know like that. Anyway,
Laurie. The other thing to think about is that eclipse cycle. So with the new moon and the idea of closing the door on something that is no longer serving. So something about that is not serving you in your community. What thing do you want to close the door on in order to make room for the new? And then at the full moon, we see the fruits of that labor, which is something to do with your creative acts or the giving of love, so that's what this cycle's about. But again, with eclipses, we've got to think about more about endings and being very conscious about what you want to bring closing to in order to clear out room for new cycles. So that's kind of a little more the focus, rather than, hey, I'm just going to plant the seed and something great's going to grow there. It's not quite the same. So yeah, but endings are important too. We just don't talk about them as much in our society. Right. We don't like to.
Yeah, we can't begin new things without endings.
Yeah, you got to make room.
You've got to exactly. Yeah. And that's not always as easy to understand as it seems like it ought to be.
Yeah, because it's kind of like the eclipses ask you to attend to something in the past, and it's like we're sort of more of a future oriented society. We want to hurry up and get on with it. It's like, well, actually, no, you need to look at the past, reckon with it, and consciously close some doors.
And it's so tricky. I mean, that is the tricky thing about this particular Taurus season, is that we're being asked to open doors and close doors at the same time.
Yeah, but this is the complexity of life. And, while we're seeing things crumble around us, we can all probably attest to that, we're also seeing the emergence of really new and important things. So it's both. It's both and.
It's both and, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to Leo rising. And that's going to bring that Taurus focus into the 10th house of career, reputation, how people in the world see you, not as an individual, but as a, what's the word I'm looking for? I think, the ascendant is the personal, when you meet a person face to face. This is when you know about them, the reputation. I remember reading early on in books that this is the front door. The ascendant is the front door, and the midheaven or the 10th house is kind of the roof. It's what's seen from a distance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of the chart being a ship, and that the ascendant is the helm. And so it kind of suggests what direction is your life going in? Like, what is your life about? And with Leo rising, your life is about some sort of recognition, some sort of gathering of people around the hearth fire. You're just like kind of this bright spark that can be both inspiring and funny, and put sort of a performance based aspect to others. So something about those things.
Yeah.
And
So,
here we're back into angular houses.
so if we're a ship and this is the helm, what is this? Is this the mast?
I think it is. It's what the sails hung up on, right?
It must be, right? So that's where the
Excuse me.
focus is. It's on your mast, not on your helm. Anyway, so yeah, you're really bringing that warmth and determination of Taurus into the career line. And as it moves in there and the month goes forward, it's going to again conjunct Uranus and square Saturn. So that's going to bring attention and light to this kind of challenge that there has been over the last few years between your career and possibly your primary relationship or important relationships, maybe a business partner. But there's some sort of tension between your outer world and your relationship life that is going to be highlighted when the sun does its little dance between those two.
Yeah, I mean, this is the person who is maybe thinking about a move, and then they meet somebody and that person's like, hey, I know you wanted to move to the United States, but actually I move in Australia. You want to come with me? So it could be, but there's some tight connection between, as you're saying, the career and the primary partnership. Once again, isn't necessarily negative, can be something new and interesting, exciting. But anybody with Uranus up there in that 10th house, there's going to be some kind of big shakedown to do with your profession, whatever that is. So
absolutely. And it's going to impact your relationship in one way or another. It could be that you and your partner are planning to move, and then at the last minute they're like, nah, I'm not.
I mean, it really is interesting. So
but that really shines a light on some challenge that's been going on there for a while. Okay. So from there, you want to talk about the Mercury retrograde?
Sure. Let's do that.
All right. So Mercury is going to head into Gemini and into your 11th house on April 29th. And then very shortly thereafter, on May 10th, it's going to go retrograde. So your thoughts go to the community and then they slow down.
Yeah. And then you're like, just kidding. I'm not actually quite ready to bring this out into my community yet. I got to go back to work and keeping it in the professional realm for the moment, and rethink about that. Keep my attention focused firmly in my profession. I'm not out of the woods yet. Yeah.
And again, Mercury retrograde, people dread it and people get all weird about Mercury retrograde, but Mercury retrograde is a really wonderful thing to be aware of and to utilize in a way that makes sense. When Mercury is retrograde, things are not about moving forward. They're about cleaning up the past, doing what you have to tie up loose ends.
Yeah.
So for you, the loose ends are going to be in both the community and your career, because it's going to retrograde back in there.
Yeah, and it's an echo of the eclipses. This idea of having to kind of really just button some things up, that are left hanging. And sometimes you can't button things up in a nice, pretty way. You just have to kind of accept that things are coming to an end and closing that out. So yeah. And so in this case, you're going to have that the solar eclipse in Taurus happening on the April 30th. It's going to be up there in your 10th house. So some chapter that you're bringing to a close. And then 2 weeks later, you're going to see some way that's impacting your home life. And that can be your physical home. It can be your family that you live with, or it can even be your ancestors. So thinking about, I mean, when I see this chart, I mean, just what we just talked about, Laurie, I just see this is a person who's moving, because there's so much stuff about relocation, and there's so much stuff about
Yeah.
closing things down. And, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing I think we want to think about is the fact that Jupiter is just, so we've had this little sweet spot.
Mhm.
Maybe you inherited some money and maybe that's what's propelling you to move. I
Yeah. Making
but
it
there's
easier.
right, making it easier. There's been some sweet spot in that eighth house, which is about other people's resources in some manner, other people's resources, other people's values. There's been some sweet spot there for you. And when Mars moved in there, you probably saw a few cracks in the facade of perfection. But then
Mhm.
both Venus and Jupiter are moving forward and going into Aries in your ninth house. So this really suggests that you take what you've learned in that area from other people's resources and bring it into expansion of your worldview, your understanding of the world. Maybe this
Yeah.
is travel. Maybe you're not just moving, maybe you're traveling.
Mhm. I was
Yeah.
just thinking, this made me think, like, so you got an inheritance, then Mars moved into Pisces, you got the tax bill from the inheritance. Oh crap. And then you're like, ooh, I'm gonna sink that money into some schooling. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
there's
Some
something like that.
schooling or some
Yeah.
travel or
Yeah.
some way that's going to really open
Yeah.
up your understanding of the world.
Yeah.
That's lovely. We figured you
um
all out, Leo
yeah, you
rising.
got Leo rising, you're good. Yeah.
You're good.
um I think just the final note I would add is, just again, I mentioned at the beginning, we're in an angular house. So angular houses just usually imply more active out in the world things happening. So it's likely that that ties in with our moving scenario or some sort of relocation or travel or something like that. Very active
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. So now we're going to move to Virgo rising. Let's see. And now Taurus, the Taurus sun has moved into the ninth house. This suggests that the light and warmth is going to move into the area of your worldview, or, it's time to pay attention to what you're studying, what you're learning, what you're having published, what you're teaching, some worldview area. So that's where the Taurus sun is going to show up.
Yeah. So this is get, find a sense of grounding through your ability to gain wisdom. Like find, get your mind in a stable place, open, but be nice and grounded in this area. Be thinking about how to stabilize yourself, because there's definitely disruption in this area. There's something shifting and changing. Yeah, maybe that book is going to be getting published sometime in the not too distant future here, with Uranus making it all different in your ninth house.
Yeah, as the
Yeah.
sun approaches and conjuncts Uranus and squares Saturn, it's shining its light on some challenge that you've had between your day-to-day routines and your worldview, or your that whole, what you're studying or what you're teaching or learning there.
Another way of thinking about this, again, like for somebody, might be that there could be a legal challenge, something that you're doing in your day-to-day business came into a legal light. That could be something, especially again with not you, Laurie, but with cadent houses. Again, it brings in this idea of those things actually being a distraction and pulling you out of what you're trying to do. So just, that might be something that's like, oh no. Again, always is a tough side, and is always a lighter side. The lighter is some sort of awakening in your worldview, and you're going to be able to stabilize your new learning into your day-to-day life. That's another way to look at it.
That's so interesting. Okay, so from there, we are going to think about what's going on with Mercury. Mercury is going to be leaving the ninth house and Taurus behind and moving into Gemini in your 10th house. So somehow your thinking goes into a more career oriented space, only to be like, no, you got to slow down and back up and rethink this whole piece.
You got to go retake the test. It's kind of like,
Yeah,
if
that's
you're trying to be
exactly
a lawyer, you're going in the profession. Oh, you failed the bar. You got to go back and do it again.
right. Okay. So you wrote the book, but now you have to go back and rewrite it.
Right. It's revisions.
It's
Again,
revision.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
Mercury
awesome.
retrograde, it's just think about all those words. I mean,
Oh,
we've
yeah.
mentioned quite a few of them, but reviews, revisions. Yep. There's a lot of that going on here. So,
And I just have to say how much I love Mercury retrograde.
yeah.
Over the years, I have so much learned to appreciate the fact that every, whatever, 3 times a year, Mercury gives us this opportunity to go back and revise all the mistakes that we've made. I love it. Okay. So that's Mercury. Now, the next thing we want to think about is Jupiter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jupiter.
Let's see. Both Venus and Jupiter have left behind this little sweet spot for quite a while now. We've had this little sweet spot for you with Virgo rising. This has been about putting your partner on even more of a pedestal than they're usually on, which with Pisces in the 7th house, they're always on a pedestal. But that area of relationship has felt pretty blissful for quite a while. Mars moves in and you get a little glimpse of some of the cracks. And then Jupiter says, well, we're going to go into the 8th house and we're going to expand our understanding of how we need to take action on some of the more difficult parts of partnership, the baggage that other people carry in the 8th house, other people's values. We have to take action on how we are navigating the boundaries of others.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the good news is that it's really easy to idealize relationships, and it's that whole like 6-month period in the beginning where everything's great and wonderful and they're doing this forever, and then boom, you start bumping into each other's kind of more shadow sides or the baggage hidden away. And but the good news is this is when the relationship really begins, like that it's real. And if you start working through that period, you're onto something good, because you have to go through that no matter what, that period, to have the relationship really be in the real world and to really know each other on that deeper level. So, it's okay. It's time. There's a little bit of like, since it's Aries here, you're establishing your own autonomy, and you're very clear about your boundaries, but at the same time, because it's Jupiter and it's Venus, there's a benefit to it. This is where you really negotiate the contract of your relationship, where you start getting into like, how are you really going to do this? I've gotten through the dreamy fairy tale period. Now, it's good. So yeah, it can be a little disruptive, but it also can be revealing, as to what's
absolutely
real.
Yeah.
And
maybe with Jupiter moving into that 8th house, maybe you just inherited a lot of money.
Yeah. That'd be true. And
okay, so next we want to think about the eclipses, right?
Yeah, that's
all right.
So here we're planting that seed in the 9th house, so you're wanting your mind to be open. You're wanting to develop more wisdom about your worldview and take on new viewpoints. And so this is about letting go of those stagnant viewpoints that just aren't working anymore. This is, if you want to broaden your mind, you're going to have to let go of some of the stuff that you're stuck in. So letting go of that, and that just quite honestly allows you to get along with your neighbors better. When you get that full moon coming around to the 3rd house, makes it easier to go through your neighborhood and just be more open and less judgmental, and more kind of like, hey, that's cool. I've never seen that before. I don't, I wonder who that person is, and being a bit more curious, as to just noticing those. And with the eclipse designation, it's bringing real conscious light to what are those attitudes and things. Like maybe you have a bit more bias than you realized, and it's just time to open the door and realize that people are people. So there's a couple different ways you can look at that, but
that's awesome.
Okay.
All right. Are we ready for the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. I like how you talk about the eclipses there. All right, so Jenny, now we're talking about Libra rising. So for those of you who have Libra rising, this Taurus season, the sun has moved into your 8th house. So it's really shining a light on your ability to navigate other people's stuff, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you think of that, Jenny?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because I was thinking with Libra rising, that means Venus is in charge of your whole chart. Is sort
Oh,
of the,
yeah.
but it also is in charge of your 8th house, which is kind of funny because Libra and is so much about harmony and finding balance, and yet it's also kind of governing this area of life where you're struggling with different, people's difficult stuff. So that's kind of an interesting thought where you're really having to draw some good boundaries with people when you have this, because you've got that Taurus in the 8th house. But I imagine quite good at drawing boundaries. I guess the question is, you just got to make sure they don't turn into walls, right?
Right.
Like you don't want them to be too hot. You want to you want to be able to work with people in this capacity.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So it's really, it is shining a light on that area. How do you grapple with other people's baggage? How do you manage your own boundaries and work with that? And as we go into the month, that sun is going to conjunct the Uranus and square Saturn. So it's really bringing to light some issue that you've probably been grappling with over the past year or two, around some challenge between this ability to, or necessity to grapple with other people's baggage and your own creativity, or your own, where you more naturally give of yourself. There's some challenge in that.
Yeah. As you were talking, Laurie, it kind of popped in my mind the idea of like the 5th house is also the house of lovers. So that's kind of where you meet this fun new person and you hook up and you're having this really fun relationship. And then guess what? It gets kind of serious because you really like them. And then all of a sudden you're having to redo how you deal with other people's intense emotional issues, because as the relationship turns more serious. So that's kind of something that I was just thinking about. It really is that playoff between this fun, playful place and then this like, oops.
Right.
And now we just came up against, somebody's
Right.
values that maybe don't jive with your own. And so you're trying to figure that out and trying to, figure out that tricky balance.
And yet it's a little bit of a twist too, because yes, this is the fun area, but Saturn's the one that's in there.
Right.
So it's like there's almost like this idea that you want to stabilize and keep the fun there, and yet you're being really awakened to that deeper level. There's something in that's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's an interplay. And again, when we're dealing with these houses, this is the 5th and the 8th. So we are dealing with succeeding houses again, which all in some way or another deal with value and resources. And so the 5th house is your ability to give unconditional love. And the 8th house is how you contend with the shared resources of others. So just we are dealing again with those kind of resource places with Libra rising. So.
Interesting. Okay, so the next thing I think we're going to look at is what Mercury is doing. Mercury will be on, let's see, on April 29th. Mercury is going to go into Gemini. It's the 9th house for you with Libra rising. This is bringing Mercury, your thought processes, into the 9th house of higher learning, higher understanding, your worldview. And then as soon as it gets in there, it's going to slow down and turn retrograde.
Yeah. This is kind of, I was thinking about how eager Mercury kind of is to get into Gemini because it's its home sign. So Mercury's like, sweet, I'm going into Gemini. It's great. And I get to go and like study and read and kind of nerd out on some stuff and open my mind. And it's like, no, just kidding. You're going to have to go back into Taurus and deal with other people's intense stuff and, really deal with maybe some less pleasant things. Sorry about that, Mercury, but you're not done yet. And then you'll get to go back. And it's a little bit of that.
Right. Yeah. It's that push pull thing. Like, we're moving forward. No, we're not. Sort of the whole idea of the month, I think, is that back and forth. So that's, and enjoy Mercury retrograde. It gives us an opportunity to catch up with ourselves I
Yeah.
really think of that. You know, don't pressure yourself on that one.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
okay.
I mean, so I think the other, my head was kind of going into the eclipses because I wanted to talk a little bit more about Taurus and the idea of this is just a place where you need to find your grounding. It might be a place that challenges you to find grounding, like when you come up against others kind of conflicted things, which again with Libra rising, you might be someone who's a bit conflict averse, and yet you're going to be having to deal with some conflict. So I think I'm thinking about that a little bit. So closing the door on whatever your habits might be around Taurus. I mean, I keep thinking about if your boundaries are too strong, if you've built walls up, that is not going to help you. So it might be an opportunity to trust yourself a little bit more and let that boundary become a little bit more malleable rather than this rigid thing.
Right.
And then guess what? When you get around to that full moon, it's going to help you develop a better relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Developed a little bit more trust. That's what we're looking at. And again, we're thinking about discarding habits and things like that are getting in your way.
Yeah. And with Uranus there, it's going to blast it open.
Yeah. Something's going to come at you if it's unconscious. The less conscious it is, the more it's going to come out from the outside world to you externally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's interesting. Okay, so the next thing we want to think about is both Venus and Jupiter will be moving out of Pisces, where they've been embroiled in a little sweet spot for a while now. So that's sixth house, which is where you've had this little sweet spot going on. Probably, it's somehow involved in your routines. Maybe you've had an awesome meditation practice for the past couple of months. And, whatever that sweet spot is, when Mars moved in there, a few of the little cracks started showing. And now both Venus and then Jupiter, and that's the important one, is Jupiter, because Jupiter spends approximately a year in each sign. So Jupiter is going to be going into Aries. Whatever this has been developing over this sweet spot area now is ready to take action in the area of relationship, one-on-one relationships.
Yeah, so this is to me, okay, I'm gonna, really have a great yoga practice. I'm gonna be doing all these great yoga poses and breathing practices are really gonna help me. And then you're gonna have to take those practices off the mat into whatever intensity may come up in your partnership. I mean, doesn't mean you're breaking up necessarily. It could be that you're going through a change. Again, what comes to mind is maybe you're getting ready to have a child with somebody, and you're going to have to take all of those practices and employ them into day-to-day life. I mean, it could, there's a bunch of different things it could mean. Or perhaps you're feeling like you need a bit more independence in your partnership, and so now you're trying to figure out how to take those things that you've learned in those routine or practices, or maybe in therapy, and apply them into your relationship now. So it's where the rubber meets the road. You're gonna be tested.
Right. Yeah. And Jupiter moving into that seventh house, it's also just really expanding the relationship in one manner or another, whether it's expanding it in a negative way or a positive way. But Jupiter generally brings, it's considered the great benefic. It brings benefits.
Yeah. And part of how that plays out is dependent on two things. One, what your natal chart itself has in the seventh house. And two is the level of consciousness you have in your life. Like how much work have you done in introspectively? But really with the Jupiter and Venus, we're really kind of looking at this as most likely to be an opening that's beneficial.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So anything else, or are we ready to go right on to Scorpio rising?
I think we covered it in this one. Yep.
Okay.
You're ready.
So we are going to, I know why. We got to get back to this one. Here we go. Now with Scorpio rising, the Taurus focus itself is in the seventh house. So the sun and the warmth the warmth and the light of the sun moves into your seventh house, and your relationships become more of a focal point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyone with the Scorpio rising, you've probably experienced some sort of shifting in the past couple years in your relationship with
Yeah.
Uranus in the seventh house. This is the seventh house is a powerful house. It's angular, and it's going to very much be something that's obvious in your life. And so with the sun going in there in this Taurus season, you're just getting kind of another look at that about what is shifting in your partnership. Um, yeah, and also, how do you stay grounded in partnership? Like, how do you strike that balance of having enough autonomy for yourself, yet being able to cooperate and be in cooperation with your partner? I mean, this is the kind of the crucial balance between self and other, that you're experiencing, both the sun in Taurus and the eclipse season going in this area of life too. So,
Right. And yeah,
mhm,
as the sun, through the month, as the sun goes and conjuncts with Uranus and squares Saturn, it brings up that little bit of a struggle that you've been having over the last few years between relationship and home and family. There's some issue that's been going on there in that area, um, for some time. And
mhm,
this is going to really shine a light on that issue.
mhm. And I mean, best case scenario, it might mean that you feel much more stable with Saturn in your fourth house, like that your home life feels more stable, and that it's actually benefiting some new things in your relationship, your primary relationship, that might be part of that family life. But it wouldn't have come without some hard work and some effort
Right,
with the square. Like,
right,
it's not gonna just
right.
happen. It's
Yeah,
because you would have made some real conscious efforts to bring those things into better alignment, for sure.
right. Because there's definitely a
Hmm.
challenge there. Your
Hmm.
family doesn't like your partner doesn't like the way you parent. There's some issue that has
Hmm.
has been bubbling in that area. And yeah, with the sun now in Taurus approaching that, it's really
Hmm.
an opportunity. It's going to shine a light on it, but it's an opportunity to work on stabilizing it and steadying that area.
Yeah, I mean, it might even be something like having to care for an elderly parent
Yeah.
and seeing how much it's changing your relationship. But it might also, again, if you've been working hard and you with a good partner, like, it might create some sort of opening and awareness,
Yeah.
awakening in your relationship. So,
Yep. Yep. Yeah. These
mhm,
things don't have to be good or bad.
yeah.
They shift and change our lives, but yeah,
Hmm.
putting the labels of good and bad on them is not helpful. All
Yeah.
right. So the eclipse itself happening between the first and the seventh house.
Hmm.
What do you want to say about that, Jenny?
Well, this is that time to just take a look at your relationship. Think about, so the solar eclipse happening first with the new moon on April 30th. This is the time to think about what things do you want to slough off in your relationship? What skin do you want to shed? Especially with Taurus there and Scorpio
Mm,
rising. So just thinking about that, what are some ways that you can lighten your load a little bit, and really find a sense of profound groundedness through your partnership. And then 2 weeks later, coming into that lunar eclipse on the 16th, noticing what kind of impact it has had on you personally, on just independent you, like, not in the context of all these relationships, but just you in
right.
relationship with
Yeah.
yourself. What
Yeah.
is the impact? And what are some ways you can embrace that transformative, empowered Scorpio
Mm,
intensity that you have with
mm,
Scorpio rising?
yeah.
You're here to make some change. You're here to show the way to shift some transformation for people. So,
Wonderful.
all things to think about. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so
Mhm.
the next thing is Mercury. Mercury heads into Gemini on what, the 29th, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, April
Yep. That's right.
29th, Mercury moves into Gemini. And then on May 10th, Mercury goes retrograde. So there's a lot of stable thinking about relationship. And then it goes into Gemini and it brings more curiosity, like, okay, I've been thinking about relationship. Now I got to go into the deeper levels of my partners and understanding other people, really grappling with that understanding other people's values and baggage. But
Yeah.
then you get in
Mm.
there, it's like, oh, I'm all curious. I wonder what this person or these people think about these things. And then, oh, I can't really get curious about that because I have to go back and do some other work first.
Yeah. And I mean, fortunately, with Gemini in your eighth house, this can be a little bit of a lighter touch, and have,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you can, like, I like how you're using that keyword curious, because that really is, Gemini is just this little sprite that likes to
Right.
pop around and poke around and see what's there and see, pass along information. So it really is just getting to kind of do that, and
Yeah.
it's going to
And
be
like,
fine.
yeah, like we were talking before about Mercury, it's sort of like it's in a hurry to get in Gemini because Gemini is one of the signs that it rules and it's really excited to get in there. But then it just hits that wall and has to turn around and go backwards for a while.
Yeah.
But, always remember Mercury retrograde is very useful. It gives us a
Yeah.
chance to catch up with ourselves and, go back and reconsider things that we might have just passed by too quickly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
That's
that.
great.
And
And
then we've got both Venus and Jupiter leaving their little sweet spot that they've been immersed in for a while. That sweet spot for you with Scorpio rising has been in the fifth house, whether that be your creativity or children, love affairs, some way in which you give of yourself has felt good. It's felt really good. And now it's like you take all of that sweet energy and push it into the sixth house. It's time to take action on your day-to-day routines. You've been sitting there blissed out somehow in your creative space for a while. Now it's time to get serious about what you're doing with your day-to-day activities.
yeah. And with Scorpio rising, that gives you a real watery emphasis in your chart, whatever else you have going on there. So this is kind of like you've been dreaming about being an artist. You've kind of dabbled and had some fun with it, and then Mars stepped into that Pisces space, and all of a sudden you're like, no, I really want to do this for work, and you're suddenly facing wait. So I'm kind of moving away from dreamy artisticness and into having to like produce things. And then not
Right.
only that, when the Jupiter and Venus go into Aries, now you're needing to bring those artistic skills into your day-to-day work life. This is what you do for work now. So
Right.
it takes on a whole different
Oh,
thing, so that's just a process that can describe. But it's also worthwhile, right? We're still talking
that's
about Jupiter,
interesting.
still talking about Venus. So this is you following if you are pursuing the dream of being an artist, this is how you do it, and these are the realities that you must face.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting, especially because Mars rules your Scorpio ascendant. Mars is in Pisces, so this is a potent little planet for you, and you have an Aries focus, so that could be a story like that for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's interesting to think about wherever, for all of us, wherever that Pisces is, shifting those planets into Aries. It's like, yeah, you've been in a dreamland and now you got to take action.
yeah.
It's really as simple as that. Okay.
Hmm.
Are we ready to move on to Sagittarius rising?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we have it. And this brings the Taurus sun into the sixth house. So the light and warmth of the sun comes into the sixth house, really putting our attention on our day-to-day activities,
Hmm.
how we care for ourselves, self-care, what we do on a day-to-day level to support our health.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is also your um sometimes I forget this, but just really is like it describes your work life too. Like this
Yeah.
is like what this is the nuts and bolts of this is your job, not your profession, your career. This is
Right.
your job. What do you actually do for
Yeah.
your job? So maybe you've probably experienced some sort of shift and shakeup in that area of life ever since Uranus has been in Taurus, and now this Taurus season is just shining a light on where, like, how grounded do you feel in these routines. Is there, what adjustments do you need to make to feel a stronger sense of connection and groundedness in your day-to-day routines.
Yeah. So as you know, throughout this Taurus season, the sun is going to conjunct Uranus and square Saturn. That little combination, that little square between Saturn and Uranus has been active for a couple of years now, creating some sort of a stress in your life between the third house and the sixth house. And that's an interesting combination. It's like, I think of the third house as the day-to-day routines of the mind, and the sixth house as the day-to-day routines of activities. So, you know, what's the stress between those? How is your mental activities kind of pushed up against your day-to-day routines?
Yeah, and it might be that you've thought about yourself as being one way for a long time. Maybe you're like, oh, I'm this type of person, and that's what I do. And then actually, what you're really doing, what your actions show, is that you're doing something else. Like it might be that you think of yourself as an intellectually motivated person, but actually, your job is raising money for organizations. So even though you think of yourself making money through one set of things, you're actually having to do something much more tangible and physical. They're both Mercury. Well, no, they're not. Sorry. Never mind. Scratch that. I'll turn it over to you.
That's what happens when you start talking about astrology. Your mind starts going a little too fast. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Where was I?
Pause.
Pause. So,
anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting little combination there. It's a funny place to have it. I think of that as being interesting. But yeah, the sun will shine a light on that challenge, whatever that challenge is for you, how you think and how you behave on that day to day, or your communications that are really kind of pitting you against your day to day routines. Yeah,
it's kind of like you have a PR problem. That's what I was thinking. It's just like he's
perfect.
It's a little bit of that. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we can go from that to, where are we next? We're going to Mercury. Mercury is going to find its way into Gemini. You know, Mercury's excited. It's going to Gemini. Gemini is one of the signs that it rules. It's really excited to get there, so it's in a hurry to get there. It's tired of thinking about the day-to-day routines of the life. It wants to think about relationship. No sooner does it get into Gemini, and it's about to go retrograde. So it goes into Gemini on April 29th, and then on May 10th, it turns retrograde. So all of that excitement and moving forward and getting curious about what's going on with your relationships, you kind of have to stop and retrace your steps.
So it's a little bit like you're like, okay, I'm ready to focus on my partner, but you know what? You should go ahead and book that massage because you need to do some kind of self-care, that you're not quite done with that. And that's actually going to help you, or schedule that last, whatever it is, body work, or maybe you have an appointment with a trainer to really boot up your fitness routines, something like that.
Right. Something more physical before you get into that more mental place that brings you into the seventh house of relationship. Okay. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about, I believe, is, I know what we want to talk about next is the eclipse. All right. So what's going on with that eclipse, Jenny?
Well, once again, we want to think about endings and closing things down. So this is, take a look at your routines. These are the routines that affect your fitness, that are building preventative care to keep your health intact. This is the health of your body. So you want to just think about, are there a couple things that you're doing that aren't really very helpful? Maybe it's an eating thing. Maybe it's time to slow down on those bags of chips, or I'm projecting a little bit, but maybe it's time to just kind of think about a couple things that aren't serving you in order to make room for some better routines. Maybe you're just finished with one aspect of self-care and you're moving on to something else. Like, you don't need to go to the chiropractor anymore, but now you need to go get some acupuncture. And then 2 weeks later, at the full moon and the lunar eclipse, you're going to see how that impacts your relationship with those deep unconscious places. Or you can also think of it as sort of with the divine, or the cosmos, or these really big intangible concepts, is how do those practices that you're changing like open up the door for a healthier relationship with how you fit into the cosmos, which ultimately is going to support your mental health.
Oh,
It's
that's
like
great.
expanding that. Yeah.
Oh, I love how you just talked about that. That made so much sense to me.
Oh, good.
Okay. So the next thing we want to think about is, where's the sweet spot been for the last month or so? It's been in your fourth house. All those planets in Pisces have really created a little sweet spot for all of us. And when Mars moved in a short time ago, some of the cracks started appearing, but your sweet spot has really been around your home and family. And that could be, around your family members, your actual physical home. So there's been some dreamy sweetness going on there. And now Jupiter and Venus are going to be moving out of that area. And whatever that dream has been is now time to take action on, as especially Jupiter, because Jupiter is a relatively slow moving planet. It'll be in your fifth house for approximately a year, but it's expanding your how you give love. So this family sweet spot is transitioning into giving of love.
Yeah. So this makes me think a little bit that there's maybe being a little bit of like tranquility, like kind of a sweet spot, as you've mentioned, in the home life. And now with Venus and Jupiter going into that fifth house, that maybe there's some kind of upset that's happening with one of your children. Maybe one of your children has been in a good spot and now they're struggling, so it could be something like that. But again, because it's Venus and Jupiter,
Right.
it could just be a necessary part of the journey to get your child to a happier place. I also thought of the idea of this might be like in the fourth house where you're like, I'm going to remodel my home because I really want to have that little artist studio so I can do my work. So you're, oh, this is going to be great. And then now guess what? The contractors have arrived and it's kind of disruptive and it's all for something good. So you can create more art, but it's going to be a little bit like, maybe frustrating and just a lot of like masculine energy flying around that you weren't quite ready for. So even though you planned it.
Right. I mean, that's the thing about it that's so interesting, is it's been this really dreamy thing. And yet wherever Jupiter moves, it brings expansion and good stuff. But it is a bit of a shock going from that sweet passive state of Pisces to Aries. Yeah, it's quite it's a little bit of a shock there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. I think that covers what we needed to cover there. And now we're going to move on to those of you with Capricorn rising. Okay. So with Capricorn rising, this is bringing the sun, the light and the warmth of the sun into your fifth house, the fifth house being the area of where you give love. Children, love affairs, your own creativity, where you give of yourself kind of unconditionally. It's not, people always talk about the fifth house, children, love affairs. It's not like children and love affairs are always perfect by any means. But this is where you're giving of yourself. It's not the hard work of children or the heartbreak of love affairs. It's where you're just giving unconditionally of yourself. So that's really what's being highlighted here.
Yeah, that's really an area of life that ideally is you're very present in, that you're in that playful beginner's mind space. You're having a good time and enjoying yourself in a sort of a very joyful way. And in certain ways, it's the house of joy. Though it's interesting having Taurus there, because that sort of suggests perhaps somebody who's a bit risk averse in a certain way, or maybe nervous to love unconditionally because it's giving too much. And it can be scary. I mean, there's real vulnerability there as well. So it could be, especially with Uranus in there, it's sort of like turning the soil like upside down, like kind of revealing what some of the some of these more tumultuous feelings underneath.
And through the course of the month, as the sun moves forward and conjuncts Uranus, squares Saturn, this is going to bring attention to a longer running issue that you've been dealing with for the past year and a half or 2 years, some sort of tension between the second house of your personal resources and the fifth house of where you give love. This could be, your children asking you for money. That's what I think of with that. But there's some tension between how you give love and your resources that's been with you for a while, that there is a light being shown on that to be managed and worked with at this time.
Yeah, like so, I mean, similar to what you're saying, like that you want to take up some more creative pursuits, but you haven't figured out how to earn a dime from it. It's not helping your livelihood in the second house. Is that tension, yet you still feel very compelled to do it.
Right.
Or and again,
or
go
you
ahead.
might decide you want to do this great creative project and realize how much money it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
Or, oh my God, I just had a baby and I had no idea how much money it was going to cost to raise this child.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the same time that, the second house, that is how you value yourself. This is your core self-worth, so it's still something you must do. It's not like you can just discard it and be like, well, I'm not going to be creative, or never mind, I don't want the child anyway. Like you can't go back and do that. You must contend with the stress and the tension, and just, this is how growth happens. I mean, this type of pressure is what creates growth.
And that's why, in our natal charts, as well as transiting planets, when we see squares, which really creates that tension, those are the places where we grow. If we didn't have any squares in our natal charts or any squares by transit to our natal charts, why would we bother?
Yeah, it can be a lot. So yeah.
So the next thing let's think about is the eclipses.
Yeah, so let's see. So here we're thinking about that, the solar eclipse on April 30th falling into your fifth house. So again, this is the idea of needing to just be very conscious and aware of what kinds of things you want to let go of. We're bringing in this idea of closing doors so that new exciting things can open. And given that this is the house of creativity, there's definitely going to be some way that you're wanting to open up space in the way that you give love, which might be this creative act. It is the way you give love to the world. I mean, that kind of concept. So you're making room for that. And as you do that, 2 weeks later at the full moon eclipse, the lunar eclipse on May 16th, you're going to see the way that impacts your community. And that might be something, maybe you have a new community because you've closed some doors, you've shifted what you're doing creatively, and now you're finding new people that support this new thing. And so you're having to kind of let go of some old ways of viewing community and open the door to some new stuff. So this is, awesome. Again, this is all part of our growth.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So the next thing, whoops, what happened here? Okay. The next thing I want to think about is Mercury. Mercury is at the beginning of this Taurus season. Mercury is in Taurus, and it's going to be moving into Gemini, into your sixth house. That will happen on April 29th. Mercury's excited. It's moving toward its home sign of Gemini, but then it gets there, and on May 10th, it turns retrograde. So yeah, it's like, I'm in a hurry to get to that curious place of how I'm going to manage my day-to-day routines. And it's like, oh, I've got to go back and put some more effort into what I've already thought I had finished.
Yeah, this is a little bit like, okay, I'm on this new creative track and I'm ready to bring it into my daily life. And then it's like, actually, you need to take a look at the structure that you're basing this off of. The structure's not quite there for bringing it into the day-to-day. So you're kind of having to go back and do Taurus things, which is, find a sense of grounding, find a stability, find a sense of reverence for what you're doing in order to move it forward into that space.
Get your
when it comes
materials
to.
set up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, Taurus.
Or more clay.
You're right, exactly. The materials themselves with Taurus, it's really in that fifth house. It's really interesting, actually. Think about Taurus in the fifth house. The creativity has to be so much hands-on, so tangible.
Yeah, so this is like cooking, gardening. It doesn't have to be like, you might be thinking, well, I'm not really an artist. Well, I think everybody's an artist at some levels, just that you've labeled it to be a very narrow thing. But it's anything that you're getting your hands in that is really just an act of love, something pouring from your heart.
Yeah.
And with Venus ruling Taurus, there's a real sense of, there's a refinement to it. There's a sense of beauty, and that's important.
And sensuality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you think about getting your hands in the garden or kneading bread or giving someone a massage. It's all about the tangible feel of things. Is so important with Taurus. That reverence.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next thing we want to think about is, where's your little Pisces sweet spot been? Well, for those of you with Capricorn rising, that sweet spot has been in the third house, which is communication, siblings, the kind of people that populate your day-to-day, sort of like neighbors or the person at the post office, those kind of simple things, although siblings is in there, which isn't necessarily
not
simple
simple.
at all. But there's been a sweet spot in that, the day-to-day routines of how you process information as well. And so with that sweet spot, Mars moved in there pretty recently, and you start to see a few cracks, and then Venus and Jupiter say, hey, I'm going to take this dream of my communication and bring it to my family or my home.
Yeah.
Jupiter, it takes 12 years for Jupiter to go all the way around the zodiac. So it spends approximately a year in each sign. So there's an expansion in that area of home. Because it's in Aries, it's going to be an expansion of taking action or developing some courage in that area. Maybe it's time to put your house on the market, even if you're scared to do so.
Well, I was thinking about too, it's like kind of like this being the sweet spot, maybe with your sibling, that you've had this, your siblings, that it's been smooth sailing, it's been nice for a while, and now there's something shifting where it's affecting the whole family structure, where it's making a change to everybody's identity in the family. I mean, it could be, something like a sibling marrying a person that not everybody's a big fan of. And so now it's like, okay, now the family has changed. And, but again, always talking about Venus and Jupiter, it's, if you can get past the angst or the frustration, it's, it's very likely it's actually going to be a good addition. It's going to be something that's going to expand relationships. So that's the thing to remember when you're experiencing this shift. So
yeah, maybe it's time to put a new roof on the house. I just,
Yeah.
with that Aries, I think of hammers and saws and some carpentry work. It's time. Yeah, you've been, it's time to take some
that's
action.
actually, I like that you're bringing that up though, because the third house really is your neighborhood. So it could be some way that it's like, oh, it'll be so great, we're going to do this. And then it's like, whoops, now you're disrupting your neighbors. And like, there's going to be a little bit of maybe a couple words spoken, but ultimately it's going to be okay. It's all for the betterment.
Okay. So I think that covers all of that. And now we're going to move on to Aquarius. So if you have Aquarius rising, this Taurus season is going to bring the sun into your fourth house, bringing your attention, the warmth and the light of the sun into the area of your family, your home, your core, your ancestral line.
Yeah.
Some attention being brought there.
Yeah, and I think with the fourth house here with Taurus, there's probably been some sort of big shift under your feet, like the feeling of the ground moving underneath your feet, and it might be in a very private way in your private life of the fourth house, because of that Uranus being in there, it's kind of tilting things up and down. But also, the fourth house is your roots, so this could be a very internal feeling of maybe you learned something new, especially with Saturn in the first house. Maybe you learned something new that affects your identity, like something new about, maybe you find out one of your parents isn't your parent,
Right.
biologically, or something like that.
Right.
That's really, you're like, wait a minute, who am I? Like, what's happening here? And having some tension between those two things.
Yeah, that's exactly, as the sun continues through Taurus and conjuncts Uranus and square Saturn, that's a perfect example of what that tension may have been. You might have spent the last 2 years trying to understand, maybe, there's something in the family that is really impacting your understanding of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Or,
Really
I mean,
interesting.
this could be, this could really be, you're trying to stabilize your own expression of yourself, who you see yourself to be, and your family doesn't approve. I mean, there's so many ways that could be. It could be the DNA test showed up some big surprise, or it could be that your identity is a big surprise to your family and not necessarily a welcome one. So that stress between you and your family is really highlighted at this time.
Yeah, this could be a coming out process of sorts, either your sexuality or something else, something else to do with your identity.
Yeah.
But that's definitely what it made me think about. Yep. So not easy, but necessary work.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's really interesting to think about that. So then the other thing we want to talk about is Mercury. Mercury is trying to get away from Taurus. It's a little bored there. Mercury wants active thinking. And in Taurus, it is required to slow down a lot more than what it's really very happy with. And it knows that it's coming up to Gemini next, which it's very excited about. It moves into Gemini on April 29th. And on May 10th, it turns retrograde. So guess what? It has to go back and rework the family story before it can get back online with that Gemini.
Yeah. That sounds about right to me.
That. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so I think that's pretty simple. The next thing I want to pay attention to is that eclipses.
Yes, I was thinking, like, more than any other placement, any of the other 12 signs being your rising sign, this is really about getting grounded, and when I say grounded, what I mean is inside yourself, like being right in your relationship with yourself and recognizing that your true home is in your heart. So this is about having to have that solidity inside yourself. Like, everything else around you might be changing, but you are good with yourself. And that is a lot of what this speaks about. So this is the time to release or discard things that are keeping you from being grounded. I mean, this is the time to really go, what is that thing that is in my way that kind of distracts me or makes me feel, upset or not grounded? So there's something about, it's a really pretty deep process with Aquarius rising. And then 2 weeks later for the eclipse cycle, like seeing how that is impacting your very public persona. So as you find that internal grounding, nothing can rock your world, outside. I mean, that's what we're looking at from a spiritual point of view, but there's something very tangible about it too. So it might be that you need to also release something in your workspace or something to do with work colleagues or anything like that isn't working for you. Like, is there some way you can shift that to make room for just feeling, kind of liberated and empowered in your workplace?
Nice.
Or
very
your
nice,
public
Jenny.
persona.
I like that. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is, let's think about that little sweet spot of Pisces that's been going on for a while. Jupiter and Neptune both rule Pisces. And as they've gone through there, they've just created this kind of dreamy little area in our lives. And for you with Aquarius rising, this is really happening. It's happening in your second house, which is really about how you value yourself. It's also about money and resources. So chances are you've been feeling pretty okay in those areas. You feel solid in your own value of yourself. You probably are not too worried about your bank account balance at the moment. When Mars moved in here and all of a sudden maybe a few cracks around taxes coming due or whatever. But a few little cracks show up as Mars moves in there. But then both Jupiter and Venus are heading out of that area and into Aries. So it's sort of like there's been a dream going on around finances and self-worth. And then as Jupiter moves into Aries, into the third house, it's like, you've got to put your money where your mouth is. That's really an interesting thing. Your money where your mouth is. But yeah, that dreamy space around your money or your self-worth has to be really action taken on it in a very direct manner, being courageous enough to talk about that, being courageous enough to talk about your own self-worth, maybe. That's interesting.
Yeah. I almost made me think a little bit about like this idea of like, okay, I'm good. My self-worth is good and I'm feeling pretty good about my finances. And then those two move into the third house, which is also siblings. And you have that conversation with your sibling and they put you right back to those feelings before all that Pisces move into your second house where you're like, oh, maybe I don't have this figured out. I'm not so sure. And now I'm frustrated, a little bit frustrated and annoyed with my sibling for pointing that out. And there might be some kind of shakedown around that. But once again, remembering with it being the two benefics of Jupiter and Venus, that this might just be a way that you walk through a difficulty and make it into something better on the other side. That you have to walk through the valley of frustration or aggravation in order to really reclaim your autonomy and have a good relationship with, I think I'm thinking particularly of older siblings here, who have the power to kind of drop you back into those spaces so quickly.
It's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, you've got this dreamy, sweet spot around your money, your finances, you're feeling good. It moves into this area where you talk about it to your siblings and all of a sudden they're on you to borrow money. You got to kind of, anyway, some action being taken on that dreamy spot.
Yeah.
I think that's the bottom line there. Okay. Are we ready to go to Pisces?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go on to Pisces here. And now the Taurus season, the sun moves into your third house. Again, that third house is about your siblings, your communication, kind of your day-to-day routine processes of how you think. So that is shining a light on that area.
Yeah, and with Uranus and Taurus, there's got to be some sort of disruption that you've experienced in the past couple of years about, your neighborhood's different, maybe you live in a different spot. And also alongside that, your mindset has changed about how you think about yourself and, those, and if your neighborhood's changed, that means you might be having a little bit different conversations. You might be used to live next to people with one political persuasion, and now you're living next to people with a different one, and this totally different set of things going on.
Right. So, I like that. That's really interesting the way you put that. So as the sun is moving toward Uranus, where it will conjunct Uranus and square Saturn, it's shining a light on that difficulty between your conversations and your own internal processes.
Yeah, and it might be impeding your ability to develop compassion. I mean, if you're following along with my little neighborhood idea, it might be that you are suddenly having to try to find compassion for this completely opposite viewpoint than what you held before. And, you're struggling with it, and but that you're being asked to develop compassion for all points of view with
Huh.
this kind of situation. So
Interesting. I
mhm.
like thinking about that with that Saturn in Aquarius in that
Yeah,
12th house, that, yeah,
yeah,
finding that humanitarian compassion for, yeah, even people that have the exact opposite opinion of everything that you
hmm,
do.
yeah.
And
Hmm,
in today's world, it can be pretty extreme. We all know
yeah,
that,
so
right?
polarized. Yep.
Oh my God. So the next thing we want to think about is that the eclipses.
Yeah, okay. So again, with our eclipses, we're on the solar eclipse on April 30th. It's happening at 10 degrees of Taurus. And that is going to be a time to maybe retire some manner of communication that
Hmm.
is not really helping you. That's not helping you. Maybe you talk in a way that doesn't really reflect your deep values so much, you know, or
Right.
something like that. So it's a time to kind of overhaul that, or maybe because you have Taurus here, you want to be the peacemaker, and yet it's time to speak up in a different way. So
Mm,
it's a
mhm.
releasing of some kind of attachment to the way that you see yourself, the mindset you have of yourself.
Huh. I
And
like
then
that.
it, as you
Oh, that's
you know,
great.
and then 2 weeks later, we at the full moon and the lunar eclipse on May 16th, you're going to see how that impacts your worldview. So in other words, as you discard those
Ah,
old ways of thinking, suddenly guess what, your mind becomes much more expanded. You're much more able to
ah.
take in other viewpoints. You're much more able to just be open-minded in general.
Oh,
So
I
those are,
like that.
yeah, it's a good opportunity for that. So
Yeah.
mhm.
That's interesting. I like how you talked about that. Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to think about what's going on with Mercury, because Mercury's been plugging along, not all that delighted in Taurus, because it's expected to think kind of slowly and methodically, and it would much rather be in Gemini. So it's hurrying into Gemini, and it moves into Gemini on April 29th. So that brings that Mercury into your fourth house. Your thinking is going to be curious and sharp around your home, around your family. And then it almost immediately on May 10th turns retrograde.
Mhm.
So all that excitement about getting into Gemini, and then it's going to have to go back and kind of plod along and relearn what it was thinking about in
Mhm.
Taurus. Hmm.
Yeah, this makes me think of something like we've talked about renovating a little bit here, and it makes me think about you're like, okay, great, I got the architect's plans. We are in the conceptual realm of the third house, we're ready to build, and then it's like, nope, you need to
Not
go
yet.
back and get that other permit. You got to go back and redraw the plans and
Right.
change the the mindset about how this is going to get built.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about that mindset that has to be renegotiated before it's going to be able to go forward and really develop those plans. Ah,
Hmm.
that's great. Okay. So
Hmm.
then the next thing we want to think about is, where's that Pisces sweet spot been for a while now? And for you with Pisces rising, that's been in your first house. You're feeling pretty okay about yourself. You know, your own understanding of self has been kind of in a dreamy space.
Hmm.
And that's been pretty pleasant with Neptune and Jupiter, both the co-rulers of Pisces, moving through there, joined by Venus. This has been such a sweet spot, and it is the most personal spot for you. It's self. When Mars moved in there quite recently, a few little cracks might have started to open. Oh, maybe I'm not showing up quite as great as I thought. But then Jupiter and Venus are going to go into Aries this season. So it's kind of bringing this way that you've been dreaming about yourself and about who you are. It's time to take action on it in a much more direct way around, I don't know, making money with it, um,
Hmm.
really developing a more courageous understanding of your own value.
Oh, yeah, I like how you put that. Yeah, That's kind of what I was thinking of, is just like, this actually could be, some of them we've talked a little bit about sort of frustration and so on, and that might still be the case. But in a lot of ways, I see with Pisces rising, it's like it might be a relief to kind
Yeah.
of take a stand and like have an autonomous feeling about your
Yeah.
self-worth and be like, no, this is what I'm doing. I'm a pioneer in this area. I've got some real warrior energy here, and I'm going to stand up and do that. And doing it in a way that really expands your relationship to yourself and helps you see your profound value. It helps you see that you actually have quite a bit of courage to offer
Right.
to others,
Right.
and with Venus there too, it's going to impact your relationship. So I see it as a kind of it might be a little bit of a rude awakening in a way, but it also, it's much more tangible. And somebody with Pisces rising, you're going to have perhaps a little bit of a struggle with tangibility anyway, because everything feels kind of ethereal with that being your direction of life.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it might
I
be
like
useful.
that, thinking about that, just the relief. I can identify with that. This sweet spot, yes, it's been sweet, but I'll tell you, I think that, and maybe it's because, I mean, it depends on our own personal charts, how we approach this. But I definitely can identify with the thought, even though Jupiter rules Pisces, it's delighted to be in Pisces. It's not really very excited to go into Aries, but I can definitely see that as, phew, let's get out of this fog a little bit.
Yeah, it's clean. It's like decisive, and we're not thinking about consequences anymore. We're just getting on with it, taking action.
Right.
Boom.
Right.
We're
Take
igniting
action,
the rocket.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, because I was thinking, well, anyway, it is interesting how, again, Venus is exalted in Pisces and Jupiter is rules Pisces, and so they're like, hey, we're so cool here, we're so at home, it's so comfortable, and then they're going to be made a bit uncomfortable.
Right.
And
we need a little bit of that uncomfortableness. Yeah, that discomfort of Aries will push action instead of just dreams.
Yeah.
And
great.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And I think we've covered everybody and everything, and we'll do it again.
Yeah. I will just, let me just say here real quick, the dates to think about: April 19th, when the sun moves into Taurus. April 29th is when Mercury moves into Gemini. April 30th is when we have that solar eclipse at 10 degrees of Taurus. May 5th is when the sun conjuncts Uranus. And then May 15th, the sun squares Saturn. May 16th, we have that lunar eclipse. And then May 20th, the sun moves into Gemini, and we'll be doing a whole new video. So just to summarize real quick, those are kind of the hot seat dates that we mentioned for these. Oh, and I did miss one. Jupiter into Aries on May 10th was one I missed. So,
and I will put those in the show notes as well. So that will be there.
I see that.
Even when people aren't listening all the way to the very end of this long video.
What do you mean?
Okay, Jenny. Hey, it's been great doing this with you, and I can't wait to do it again for the Gemini season.
Sweet. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.